All right, get ready, because today we're diving deep into a period just packed with drama and intrigue and incredible achievements, the age of the Islamic gunpowder empires.
Yeah, we're talking about the Ottomans, Safavids, and Mughals.
Empires that really dominated huge chunks of the world from the 16th to the 18th centuries.
We're going to uncover how these empires rose to power and how they governed and even what life was like.
Yeah, and to do that, we'll be pulling from a historical text that I know you're familiar with.
Yeah, some really good stuff in here.
So what set the stage for these empires in the 1500s and 1600s?
Well, one thing that all three empires had in common was that they really took advantage of gunpowder technology.
So they were on the cutting edge of military tech.
Yeah, exactly. Gunpowder weaponry was really revolutionizing warfare.
But I'm guessing it couldn't have been just about the firepower?
Right. It wasn't all about the cannons and muskets.
Yeah.
You also needed ambitious leaders, leaders who were skilled at consolidating power.
Okay, so can you give me an example? Someone who really embodied that idea of ambition.
Well, look at Ismail Ust, the founder of the Safavid Empire.
Okay.
This guy was out there conquering Persia and establishing his dynasty by the time he was 14.
Wow, 14. I mean, I was barely figuring out algebra at that age.
Right.
It really makes you wonder about his education and upbringing.
It's incredible. Really, he was able to rally so many people to his cause, and he really understood how to use religion to solidify his rule.
But it wasn't just charisma, right?
Oh, definitely not.
Yeah.
These rulers were master strategists. They knew how to build strong armies and use their military power effectively.
Well, speaking of armies, let's talk about the Ottomans and those famous Janissaries.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's a fascinating and kind of unsettling system. Can you remind us how it worked?
Right. So the Janissaries were the elite infantry of the Ottoman army. And what made them unique was that they were recruited through this system called devshirme, where Christian boys, mainly from the Balkans, were taken from their families and converted to Islam.
It sounds like a system that was really meant to ensure loyalty to the Sultan.
Exactly. Yeah, they were raised in a very disciplined military environment, trained to be completely devoted to the Sultan.
And forbidden to marry or engage in trade.
Right. They had to focus entirely on warfare and serving the empire.
So did it work? Did this unique system help the Ottomans achieve those military successes that they're known for?
Well, yeah, initially they were a huge factor in the Ottomans' expansion.
Yeah.
I mean, they were highly disciplined, incredibly loyal, and pretty feared throughout Europe.
But I imagine, as with many things, it's a bit of a double-edged sword.
Oh, for sure. As the empire grew wealthier and more powerful, the Janissaries, well, they kind of gained more political power too,
I can see where this is going.
Yeah, and that eventually became a problem for the sultans.
So they were initially a source of strength, but eventually a source of instability.
Yeah, they started demanding higher pay and more privileges, and then resisting any attempts at military reform, so, yeah.
Wow, so a really interesting example of how an institution can kind of outlive its usefulness and even contribute to the decline of the very empire it was meant to protect.
Absolutely.
Now, the Safavid Empire also had a very powerful military, but they had a pretty different approach to building their army, didn't they?
That's right. Shah Abbas I, who was the Shah in the late 16th and early 17th centuries, he knew that he had to modernize the Safavid army, especially to counter the Ottomans. So what he did was he created this new gunpowder force. But he did it by recruiting and trading enslaved people mainly from the Caucasus region.
So very different from the Ottoman devshirme system.
Yes, very much so.
And did this reliance on enslaved soldiers have any kind of broader impact on Safavid society?
Well, yeah, it definitely impacted social dynamics, and it contributed to the growth of the slave trade in the Caucasus region.
So we have these two empires both building up their military strength, but they were also rivals, weren't they? And I understand religion played a pretty big role in that rivalry.
Absolutely. Yeah. One of the key dividing lines between the Ottomans and the Safavids was religion.
Okay.
The Ottomans were Sunni Muslim, and the Safavids were Shia Muslim.
Now, for those of us who haven't taken a religion class in a while, what's the difference between Sunni and Shia Islam? Right.
So basically it comes down to a disagreement over who should have succeeded the Prophet Muhammad as the leader of the Muslim community after his death.
Okay.
Sunnis believe that the rightful successors were elected caliphs, while Shiites believe that leadership should have passed directly to the Prophet's cousin and son-in-law Ali and his descendants.
So this difference essentially caused a split within the Islamic world.
Yeah, into two main branches.
And that really fueled the conflict between the Ottomans and the Safavids.
It definitely became a symbol of their rivalry. The Ottomans viewed themselves as defenders of Sunni orthodoxy, and the Safavids championed the Shia cause, so it was a clash of empires and also ideologies.
So where does the third of our gunpowder empires, the Mughals, fit into this religious landscape? They were ruling over a largely Hindu population in India, right?
That's right, which presented them with a different set of challenges and opportunities.
So how did they navigate that religious diversity?
Well, the early Mughal emperors, and particularly Akbar the Great, he had a very tolerant approach.
Okay.
He really believed in fostering harmony between Muslims and Hindus. He even abolished the jizya, which was a tax on non-Muslims, and he married Hindu princesses, and he had Hindu advisors in his court.
That's a pretty remarkable approach for that time. Did this policy of tolerance last?
Unfortunately not. While Akbar's approach was successful for a while, later Mughal rulers, especially his great-grandson Aurangzeb, he reversed a lot of those tolerant policies.
Oh, wow.
Aurangzeb was a devout Muslim, and he wanted to impose Islamic law more strictly.
So I imagine that caused some tension.
Yeah, it led to unrest and rebellion, which weakened the empire and contributed to its decline. It's a good reminder that even the most powerful empires can really be undermined by these kinds of internal divisions.
It seems like religion was this really powerful force in shaping the destinies of all three of these empires.
Yeah, a unifying force at times and a dividing force at others.
Well, we could talk all day about military and political stuff, but I think it's important to remember that these empires weren't just about conquest and power struggles.
Right.
They were centers of culture and intellectual vibrancy.
Absolutely. And you see that so clearly when you look at Ottoman coffee houses.
Yeah. What was it about those Ottoman coffee houses that made them so special?
Well, imagine this. You walk into this space that's kind of dimly lit, and there's the aroma of strong coffee and tobacco all around you. People are gathered, they're talking, they're playing games, maybe they're listening to music or reciting poetry.
Sounds very lively.
It really was a place where you could exchange ideas, share news, really build social bonds.
So who would you find in these coffee houses? Was it just men?
Yeah, generally women had their own separate social spaces, but the coffee houses were open to men from all walks of life. Merchants, scholars, soldiers, you name it.
So a real mix.
Yeah, a real melting pot of Ottoman society.
Did the authorities ever see these coffee houses as a threat?
Oh yeah, definitely.
I mean, anytime you get people together and ideas are flowing, there's always potential for, dissent.
Exactly. And some rulers actually tried to restrict them or even ban them completely because they did see them as potential sources of unrest.
But I bet those bans were about as effective as trying to stop people from gossiping.
Pretty much, yeah. The coffee house was just too important, too ingrained in the culture to be suppressed, so it remained this really vital social space right up to the end of the empire.
Well, so we've got the Ottomans with their coffee house culture. What about the Mughals? What's something that really captures their cultural achievements?
Well, when you think of Mughal culture, one image immediately comes to mind, the Taj Mahal.
Yes, the Taj Mahal.
Is there any other building in the world that so embodies love and loss?
I've seen so many pictures, but I can only imagine what it's like to actually be there.
It's really something else. It's this incredible testament to Mughal architectural genius, blending Islamic, Persian, and Indian styles.
Yeah.
Every detail is just breathtaking. The marble inlay, the gardens.
And it's a tomb, right? Built by Shah Jahan for his wife, Mumtaz Mahal.
Yeah, it's a love story etched in stone.
It took over 20 years to build and thousands of artisans.
Yeah, and today it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site that attracts millions of visitors.
So we've got the Ottoman coffee house, a symbol of social and intellectual exchange, and we've got the Taj Mahal, a monument to love and architectural brilliance.
What about the Safavids? Anything stand out on the cultural front?
Well, the Safavids were famous for their Persian carpets.
Oh, the carpets, yes.
You know, those intricate designs and those rich colors. They were more than just floor coverings.
Yeah.
They were works of art. They represented Safavid cultural identity. And they were a real symbol of wealth and status, actually.
Yeah, they were traded along the Silk Road, and you could find them in palaces all over Europe.
Yeah, they were sought after everywhere.
So what made them so special? Was it the materials or the designs? Well, it was a combination of things. I mean, the artisans used the finest wool and silk. They used natural dyes. They had these very complex knotting techniques, which created really detailed patterns.
So a real art form. And did this carpet weaving tradition have any broader significance for Safavid society?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It was a major industry. It employed tons of people, and it generated revenue for the empire, but it was also a source of pride, and it really represented the artistic excellence of that era.
So we've got the Ottoman coffee house, the Taj Mahal, and the Safavid carpet. Three very different expressions of culture from three incredibly influential empires. They were clearly far more than just military powers.
Absolutely. They were hubs of creativity and innovation and cultural exchange.
And their achievements continue to inspire and fascinate us to this day.
They do. It really is amazing how those empires left such a mark on the world. I mean, not just through their military strength, but through their art and culture.
Right. It's a good reminder that history is more than just battles and treaties. It's about people's everyday lives, their ideas, the art they created.
Yeah. And while we've been talking about their achievements, it's also important to remember that these empires weren't static, you know? They had their own problems, their own vulnerabilities.
Yeah, they weren't invincible.
Right.
So what were some of the internal factors that contributed to their decline?
Well, let's go back to the Ottomans. As we talked about earlier, those Janissaries, they were this incredible force, but they eventually became a liability.
Yeah, it's a classic example of how too much power concentrated in one group can lead to problems.
Right, exactly. And as they gained more influence, they became resistant to change. They demanded higher pay, more privileges, and they even interfered in politics.
So not making things easy for the sultans?
No, not at all. And their resistance to change really stifled military innovation and put a strain on the treasury.
So they were actually contributing to the decline of the very empire they were supposed to protect.
Yeah, pretty much.
What about the Safavids? What kind of internal problems were they dealing with?
Well, one of the big issues for the Safavids was succession disputes.
Oh, right. Figuring out who would be the next Shah.
Yeah, exactly. And that lack of a clear system for determining the next ruler, well, it often led to instability and power struggle.
Yes. The age-old problem of who gets to sit on the throne.
It never ends, does it?
No. Empires have been torn apart by these kinds of power grabs for centuries.
And in the case of the Safavids, those succession crises often led to violence, and that weakened the empire's central authority.
So a lack of political unity, were there other factors at play in the Safavid decline?
Yeah, economic troubles were also a big factor.
Sure.
The Safavids relied heavily on trade for their income, but they were facing increasing competition from European powers,
Right.
especially the Portuguese and the British.
So external pressures starting to impact their stability.
Exactly. And this is something you see with a lot of empires.
Yeah.
You become powerful, they get wealthy, and then they become targets for rivals.
Makes sense.
And as those economic pressures mount, they often find themselves overextended militarily.
Well, that actually reminds me of the Mughals. Wasn't overextension one of the factors in their decline as well?
Yeah, you're right. Aurangzeb, although a skilled ruler in a lot of ways, he made some decisions that ultimately weakened the empire.
Okay.
He waged these long and costly wars in southern India, which really drained the treasury and stretched the military thin.
So he was trying to do too much at once.
Yeah, he's trying to expand the empire, put down rebellions, enforce stricter Islamic laws.
Which I imagine didn't help with the internal tensions.
Not at all.
So it sounds like a combination of internal and external pressures ultimately brought down all three of these empires.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment.
Okay, so we've talked about internal pressures. Now, what about external forces? What was happening in the world around them that contributed to their decline?
Well, one of the biggest factors was the rise of European powers, both economically and militarily.
Right, the 16th and 17th centuries were this time of massive change in Europe. You know, the Renaissance, the Reformation, the Age of Exploration.
Yeah, it was a period of huge transformation.
So these Islamic gunpowder empires were basically facing a new kind of rival.
Right.
These European powers were technologically advanced, they had strong navies, they were really aggressive when it came to trade.
Yeah, they were expanding their global influence and challenging the existing order.
And how did that play out specifically in the decline of these empires?
We'll take the Ottomans, for example. They started relying on loans from European powers to fund their wars and their lavish courts.
So they ended up in debt.
Yeah, they became economically dependent on Europe, which really weakened their position.
And what about the Safavids? How did European competition affect them?
They had a hard time keeping up with European trading companies,
Yeah.
especially the British East India Company.
Yeah.
The British were establishing their own networks in the Indian Ocean, and they were taking control of important trade routes.
And I'm guessing the Mughals felt that pressure too?
Oh yeah, definitely. They had this rich textile industry, and they controlled the spice trade, which made them a prime target for European ambitions.
So European powers were playing the long game.
Yeah, I mean, they weren't just challenging these empires militarily. They were using economic leverage, exploiting internal weaknesses to get a foothold.
Okay, so I've got these rising European powers, but were there other external threats that these empires had to deal with?
Yes, in addition to the Europeans, they also had to contend with rivals within the Islamic world.
So it wasn't just a simple West versus East situation.
Not at all. There were all sorts of complex rivalries happening within the Islamic world itself.
Okay.
The Ottomans, for instance, had this long-standing rivalry with the Habsburgs in Europe. They fought a series of wars over territory in the Balkans and the Mediterranean.
So fighting on multiple fronts, essentially.
Exactly. And those wars really drained their resources and made it difficult for them to focus on internal problems.
What about the Safavids? Who were they up against?
Well, they had to deal with the Uzbeks, who were this powerful nomadic group to the east.
Okay.
And they also had conflict with the Mughals, sometimes over territory in Afghanistan.
So constantly having to defend their borders.
Yeah, exactly. It's hard to maintain stability and develop your empire when you're surrounded by enemies.
So it sounds like these empires were ultimately brought down by a perfect storm of internal and external pressures.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
Even the most powerful empires are vulnerable to these historical forces.
It's a cycle that we see over and over again.
Yeah.
Empires rise, they thrive, and eventually they decline.
But they still leave their mark on the world.
Oh, absolutely. And I think their stories offer some really valuable lessons for us.
Yeah, I mean, understanding what caused their decline can help us understand the challenges of power, the difficulties of governing diverse societies, and how important it is to adapt to change.
Yeah, and it can also help us appreciate their achievements even more. They were more than just blips on the radar of history.
They shaped cultural landscapes, artistic traditions. They left a real legacy that continues to fascinate us today.
Absolutely.
You know, it's amazing to think about how interconnected the world was, even back then.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, these empires weren't existing in isolation.
They were constantly interacting, trading, fighting.
Absolutely. And that really highlights something important about studying these empires.
What's that?
You can't just look at them in a vacuum. You have to consider the global forces that were shaping things.
It's like trying to understand one piece of a puzzle without seeing the whole picture.
Exactly. We got to zoom out and see how everything fits together.
So when we do that, what do we see?
We see these empires navigating all these complex relationships, making alliances, dealing with new threats, constantly adapting.
So it was a real balancing act.
Yeah.
Trying to maintain their power in a world that was changing all the time. Makes you wonder if any of them could have actually avoided their decline.
It's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And historians have been debating it for centuries.
So what do they say?
Well, some argue that empires are inherently unstable, because of their size, their diverse populations, the constant pressure to expand.
It's like trying to juggle too many things at once.
Yeah, eventually something has to give. And in the case of these empires,
They were dealing with internal divisions, economic problems, threats from outside, all at a time when the world was changing dramatically.
so a recipe for disaster.
Pretty much, it's hard to imagine any empire surviving those circumstances forever.
So it wasn't just one mistake or one bad decision.
No, it was this whole combination of factors that came together to bring them down.
But even though they declined, these empires still had a huge impact.
They did. Their legacies are still felt today.
So how do these empires continue to influence us?
Well, their cultural influence is undeniable. I mean,
Right.
think about their architecture.
Yeah.
The Taj Mahal, the Sumadaye Mosque in Istanbul, those are just incredible achievements.
And their art, Persian carpets, Ottoman calligraphy, all of that.
Exactly. And then you've got their intellectual contributions.
Right. They made advancements in math, astronomy, medicine.
They preserved ancient texts. They developed new ideas about government and technology. And a lot of that stuff spread to other parts of the world.
So their influence extended far beyond their own borders.
It did.
Well, it's really been fascinating to learn more about these empires.
Yeah, it's been great talking about them.
They left such a mark on the world, and their stories remind us that history is about more than just dates and names.
Right.
It's about people, their cultures, their ideas.
And those stories are still relevant today.
Yeah, they help us understand the complexities of power, the challenges of governing diverse societies,
The importance of adapting to change.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the Islamic gunpowder empires, I think it's important to remember that their stories are not just about conquest and decline.
Definitely not.
They're also about human ingenuity, cultural achievements, and the power of ideas.
And I think they offer some really important lessons for us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us on this journey. And until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep into history.